If you have ever stood in front of the grave of someone you love and felt a silence so heavy that it almost answers you back, what you are about to hear may completely change the way you understand death, prayer, and the mystery of the human soul. Just a few weeks ago, I was at a parish cemetery celebrating a funeral mass. The sky was completely overcast, the kind of gray weather that seems to match the weight of grief itself. After the mass ended, people slowly began walking toward the graves of their loved ones. I stayed behind for a moment, quietly observing everything unfolding in front of me. I saw an elderly woman approaching with fresh flowers in her hands. She walked slowly, carefully, as if each step carried years of memory. She reached the grave of her husband, knelt down directly on the damp earth without caring about her clothes, and began to speak to him as if he were still alive. She told him about the grandchildren, about the house, about everyday problems that still filled her life. And then her voice began to break. She cried as she said, "My love, I miss you so much. I wish I knew if you can hear me when I come here. I wish I knew if it makes you happy that I visit you." Not far from her, a young man stood in front of a newly placed headstone. His grief was visible, but there was something else in his expression too, something unresolved. He stood motionless, hands in his pockets, staring at the engraved name on the stone, as if searching for an answer hidden in those cold letters. It was clear he was caught between deep pain and a troubling question, whether his presence there meant anything at all, whether his loved one in any way knew he had come. All around them, others were present in their own ways. Some were praying the rosary with devotion, others were carefully cleaning the graves, and some were placing flowers and lighting candles. But beneath all these actions, there was a silent question shared by almost everyone, a question most of us have asked at least once in front of a grave we care about. Does my loved one feel anything when I come here? Do they know I am visiting? Does it bring them peace? Does it bring them comfort? Or is there simply nothing left? Because the soul is already in another reality where these things no longer matter. That scene stayed with me deeply. It was not just an observation, it was a spiritual weight. Because in that moment, I realized how much confusion exists around this subject, how many different ideas people carry, some rooted in faith, others in misunderstanding. There are those who visit graves with almost superstitious devotion, as if the soul were physically trapped inside the tomb waiting to be visited. Others have stopped going entirely, convinced that it has no meaning, that everything ends with death, and that the body is nothing more than dust. And most people live somewhere in between, unsure of what is actually happening when they stand in front of a grave and pray. That is why today I want to speak about something that is rarely explained clearly. Something that does not come from opinion or emotion, but from the deep tradition of the Catholic Church, from the writings of the saints, and from the mystical understanding of those who have reflected deeply on the reality of life after death. I'm going to show you what truly happens when you visit the grave of someone you love, whether the soul can in any way perceive your visit, what truly helps that soul, and what has no spiritual value at all. Most importantly, I will explain how to transform your visits into something that genuinely benefits the departed, instead of turning them into emotional gestures that only comfort those who remain on earth. But before we go deeper, it is important to understand why this matters so much. Because many people act with sincere love, yet without understanding the spiritual reality behind their actions. And when love is separated from truth, even good intentions can become incomplete. What you are about to hear may challenge some of your habits. It may even change the way you have always approached cemeteries and remembrance. But if you truly understand it, your prayers for the dead will no longer be symbolic. They will become real acts of mercy with eternal impact. If this topic is already touching your heart because you have loved ones who have passed away, stay with this message until the end and share it with your family, especially with those who visit cemeteries without fully understanding what the church actually teaches. Now let us begin by understanding something fundamental from the Catholic faith, something that completely changes how we see the grave, the body, and the soul. The moment we begin to understand death from the perspective of the Catholic faith, everything we thought we knew about cemeteries and graves starts to change. The first and most essential truth is this: when a person dies, the soul separates immediately from the body. What remains in the grave is no longer a living person, but the body they once inhabited during their earthly life. That body is sacred, yes, because it was once the dwelling place of a human being created in the image of God. It was once united to a soul, carrying thoughts, love, pain, and memory. But at the moment of death, that union is broken. The soul does not remain inside the tomb. It does not stay near the coffin waiting in silence. It enters eternity, and its destiny is no longer tied to physical space. According to Catholic teaching, the soul is judged by God immediately after death. If a person dies in perfect communion with God, they enter heaven. If they die in God's friendship but still need purification, they go through purgatory. And if a person dies in a state of mortal sin without repentance, they are separated from God in what the Church calls hell. These are not symbolic ideas but central truths of Christian faith. This means something very important, something many people misunderstand deeply. When you go to a cemetery, you are not going to meet a person in the physical sense. You are not visiting someone who is inside that grave, waiting for your arrival. You are standing before the remains of their earthly body, not their living soul. And yet, even here, there is a deeper mystery that the Church has always held with reverence. The soul is not physically present in the grave, but it is not completely cut off from what happens in the world either. Through a mystery that we cannot fully explain, God allows a certain spiritual awareness between the living and the dead, especially when it concerns prayer and acts of mercy. The saints and mystics of the Church have spoken about this reality with great depth. Saint Catherine of Genoa, who reflected profoundly on purgatory, described how souls in purification remain aware, in a way known to God, of the prayers offered for them on earth. Not as if they are constantly watching every detail of earthly life, but in the sense that God makes them aware of what is spiritually important for their purification and growth toward Him. Similarly, St. Faustina Kowalska recorded in her diary experiences where souls in purgatory expressed gratitude for prayers and sacrifices offered on their behalf. That gratitude itself suggests a real spiritual connection, a form of awareness granted by God between those who are still being purified and those who remain in the world. This is where the concept of the communion of saints becomes essential. The Church teaches that there is a real, living connection between three states of existence: the Church on earth, the Church in purgatory, and the Church in heaven. These are not separate worlds with no contact. They are united in Christ, forming one spiritual family. Because of this communion, what we do on earth truly matters for those who have died. Our prayers are not empty words. Our sacrifices are not meaningless gestures. Our masses offered for the dead carry real spiritual weight before God. And in return, the saints in heaven intercede for us, and the souls in purgatory are helped by the prayers offered for them. But this raises a deeper question that many people silently carry in their hearts. If the soul is not physically in the grave, then what exactly happens when we stand there, when we pray there, when we cry or speak at that place? The answer depends on the state of that soul. If the person is in heaven, they are already in perfect joy. They do not depend on our actions, but they do love us with a purified love. In that sense, they rejoice when they see us praying, when they see us living in faith, when they see us remembering them in a way that leads us closer to God. If the person is in purgatory, the situation is different. These souls are in a state of purification, longing for the full presence of God. They suffer not in the earthly sense of pain as we know it, but in the deep spiritual desire for union with God that is not yet complete. And for them, prayers offered on earth become real help, real relief, real comfort in a mysterious but true way. When you pray for such a soul at their grave, even though they are not physically there, God can allow them to receive the benefit of your prayer. It is as if a spiritual connection is activated through charity. What you do in love becomes a channel of grace for them. This is why intention matters so much. Because what happens at a cemetery is not about physical presence. It is about spiritual union, prayer, and communion through God. Now that we understand that the soul does not remain in the grave, we need to go deeper into a question that almost every person has asked at some point. What exactly does a soul experience when someone visits their grave or prays for them? The answer is not the same for every soul, because not every soul is in the same state. The Church teaches us to distinguish carefully between those who are in heaven, those who are being purified in purgatory, and those who have been separated from God forever. Each of these realities changes how we understand what our actions on earth actually mean for them. If a soul is in heaven, everything is already fulfilled. There is no lack, no waiting, no suffering. The soul is completely united with God in perfect joy. In that state, nothing we do is needed for their happiness. They do not depend on our prayers, and they are not in need of relief or assistance. But this does not mean they are indifferent to us. Love does not disappear after death, it is perfected. A saint in heaven sees all things in the light of God. When they see someone they loved on earth praying, remembering them, or living a life of faith, they rejoice. not because they gain something, but because they love us with a purified love that desires our good. It is similar to the joy of a parent who sees their child walking on a good path. The parent does not gain anything from it, but their heart is filled with peace and happiness because they love that child. But the situation is very different when we speak about the souls in purgatory, which, according to the church, is where many of our departed loved ones may be. These souls are saved but not yet fully purified. They are destined for heaven, but still undergoing a process of purification that prepares them for the fullness of God's presence. And this state is not neutral. It involves a deep spiritual longing. These souls desire God with an intensity we cannot fully understand, but they are not yet able to experience that complete union. Because of this, there is a form of suffering not like physical pain, but like a deep interior purification and longing for what they love most, God Himself. It is in this context that our prayers become meaningful in a very real way. When you go to a grave and pray for a soul in purgatory, something spiritual happens beyond what your eyes can see. The Church, through its mystical tradition, teaches that God can apply your prayers, sacrifices, and mass intentions to those souls. And in that mysterious exchange, the soul receives real relief. St. Catherine of Genoa described this reality in powerful spiritual language. She explained that when a soul in purgatory receives help through prayer or sacrifice from someone on earth, it is like a sudden moment of light in the darkness, like a refreshing drop of water in the middle of dryness, like a reminder that they are not forgotten. The effect is not imaginary or symbolic, it is real in the spiritual order established by God. This is where many people make a serious mistake without realizing it. They think that visiting a grave is mainly about expressing emotion, speaking to the deceased, or releasing grief. While these feelings are natural and understandable, they are not the main purpose of the visit from a spiritual perspective. The true power lies in prayer directed to God on behalf of that soul. It lies in the offering of masses, in the rosary, in sacrifices made with intention, and in acts of charity offered in their name. These are the things that have spiritual value for a soul in purgatory. Without this understanding, a visit to the cemetery can easily become something emotionally comforting for the living, but spiritually empty for the dead. A person may cry, speak, and remember, but if there is no prayer, no offering, no spiritual intention, then nothing is being directed toward the real need of that soul. This is why the Church, through its teaching and tradition, constantly emphasizes prayer for the dead, especially through the Holy Mass, which is considered the most powerful offering for the purification of souls. And this leads us to an important realization. The cemetery is not a place where we go to meet the dead in a physical sense. It is a place where we are reminded of death, of eternity, and of our responsibility toward those who have gone before us. It is a place where love should become action, not just memory. When love becomes prayer, when memory becomes sacrifice, when grief becomes intercession, then something truly powerful happens in the spiritual order that God has established between heaven, earth, and purgatory. But there is another side to this teaching that we cannot ignore, and it concerns what happens when we misunderstand our role in visiting the graves of those who have passed away. Because while prayer and sacrifice bring real spiritual benefit, there are also ways of approaching the cemetery that have little or no spiritual value at all, even if they feel emotionally meaningful. One of the most common mistakes is reducing the visit to pure emotion. Many people arrive at the grave, speak for a long time, cry, express their pain, and relive memories. All of this is natural. Grief is not something to suppress, and remembering loved ones is not wrong. But when the entire visit becomes only an emotional release, without any prayer directed to God, something important is missing. From a spiritual point of view, emotion alone does not help the soul of the deceased. It may bring temporary comfort to the person who is grieving, but it does not translate into grace for the one who has died. This is where many well-intentioned people unknowingly stop halfway. They feel deeply, but they do not pray deeply. Another serious misunderstanding is the belief that the grave itself holds the soul in some way. This can lead to practices that resemble superstition more than faith. Some people treat the tomb as if the deceased is physically present there, as if food, objects, or symbolic gestures placed at the grave could directly affect the soul's condition. But according to the teaching of the Church, the soul is not confined to the grave, and therefore physical offerings to the tomb do not have spiritual power by themselves. There is also the danger of treating the cemetery as a place for ongoing conversations with the dead, as if they can respond directly. Speaking to a loved one in prayerful remembrance is one thing, but expecting answers, signs, or direct communication can slowly move into a spiritual confusion that the Church warns against. The boundary between prayerful remembrance and spiritual illusion must always remain clear. On the other side, there are also those who go in the opposite direction. They avoid cemeteries completely, thinking it is useless or outdated. For them, once a person is buried, there is no reason to return. But this attitude also misses an essential truth. While the soul is not in the grave, the act of remembering the dead and praying for them is still a work of mercy. It is a way of maintaining love that extends beyond death through spiritual action. Then there is another issue that often goes unnoticed: excessive material spending that replaces spiritual care. Many families invest large amounts of money in flowers, monuments, elaborate decorations, and expensive arrangements, believing that this is the highest form of honoring the dead. But while these things can express respect, they do not change the spiritual condition of the soul. A simple prayer offered with sincerity can have far more value than the most expensive floral arrangement. A single mass offered for a soul has greater spiritual impact than any material display at a grave. This is a central teaching of Catholic tradition, even if it is often forgotten in practice. There is also a deeper issue that appears in many lives over time: emotional exhaustion. Some people spend years visiting graves frequently, speaking, crying, and investing heavily in maintaining tombs, but never move toward deeper spiritual action. Over time, they begin to feel empty, as if something is missing, even though they are doing a lot externally. This happens because external actions alone, without spiritual direction, cannot fulfill the true need of the soul of the departed. Love that remains only at the level of emotion or appearance eventually feels incomplete. It is only when that love is expressed through prayer, sacrifice, and intercession that it finds its proper spiritual fulfillment. The Church, through its wisdom, has always pointed toward a balanced approach. Respect for the body, remembrance of the deceased, emotional expression, and care for graves are all good, but they must be rooted in something deeper: prayer for the soul and offering of spiritual help. When that foundation is missing, even sincere love can become misdirected. But when it is present, even simple actions become powerful. A short prayer at a grave, a rosary offered at home, a mass requested for a departed soul, or a small act of charity done in their name can carry real spiritual weight. And this is where the meaning of visiting a cemetery begins to change completely. It is no longer just about visiting a place of memory. It becomes a moment of spiritual responsibility, where love is translated into action that reaches beyond what we can see. There is one more truth that brings everything into proper balance, and without it, the entire understanding of death and visiting graves can become either too heavy or too superficial. That truth is hope. The Catholic faith does not ask us to approach the graves of our loved ones with despair. It does not call us to live trapped in grief, as if death has the final word. Instead, it invites us to face death with faith in the resurrection and confidence in God's mercy. When St. Paul wrote to the early Christians, he told them not to grieve like those who have no hope. This does not mean we do not grieve at all. It means our grief is different. It is marked by expectation, not emptiness, by trust, not despair. Because for the believer, death is not the end of existence. It is a passage into eternity. This changes everything about how we visit a cemetery. We are not going to a place of final separation. We are standing in a place of waiting. The body rests in silence, but the soul lives in God's presence, moving toward its eternal destiny. And one day, according to Christian belief, body and soul will be reunited in the resurrection. So when you stand at a grave, you are not saying a permanent goodbye. You are saying something closer to until we meet again. That small shift in perspective transforms the entire emotional weight of the moment. It also changes the purpose of your visit. You are no longer there just to express sorrow or maintain a memory. You are there to participate in a spiritual mission, to pray, to intercede, and to offer help for a soul that may still be in need of purification or simply in joyful rest with God. This is why the Church places such importance on prayers for the dead, especially through the Holy Mass, because Mass is not just a ritual. It is the sacrifice of Christ made present, and when it is offered for a departed soul, it becomes the most powerful form of assistance we can give. At the same time, hope protects us from falling into extremes. It keeps us from superstition on one side and indifference on the other. It prevents us from believing that the soul is trapped in the grave, and it also prevents us from believing that nothing we do for the dead matters anymore. Instead, hope allows us to live in the truth that love does not end with death. It simply changes form. In life, love is expressed through presence, words, and actions. After death, love continues through prayer, sacrifice, and remembrance in God's presence. This is why visiting a cemetery should never be only an emotional burden or a cultural habit. It should be an act of faith, a moment where we remember both our own mortality and the promise of eternal life, a moment where we reconnect our love for those who have gone before us with our trust in God's mercy. And once this understanding takes root, something very important happens inside the human heart. The fear of death begins to lose its power, not because death becomes easy, but because it becomes meaningful. It is no longer an unknown wall, but a doorway that leads to something greater. In that light, even grief changes. It becomes less about loss and more about longing, less about finality and more about hope. You begin to see that your prayers are not wasted, your love is not lost, and your connection with the departed is not broken, but transformed. So the next time you visit a grave, let it be different. Let it not be only a place of tears, but a place of prayer. Let it not be only a memory of what was, but a testimony of what is still believed. That God is merciful, that the soul is eternal, and that love, when united with faith, never truly ends. Because in the end, the message of the cemetery is not only about death, it is about life that continues beyond it, and about the hope that one day, in God's presence, every separation will finally come to an end.